I know we've got 2 months till Halloween, but I couldn't wait. The 90s were a very interesting time for anecdotal horror. You know, the kind of stories that you would tell over a campfire. The veracity of these stories didn't matter because, well, it happened to a cousin of mine. Would I lie to you? In that time and place, the story was true. Because it was so much more thrilling that way. Many aspects of 90s culture embraced this. And that's no surprise. This was a time where the internet was connecting more people in their strange stories than ever before, but was still too new for easy-to-access fact-checking. Our view of the world was now so much bigger, yet so much more ambiguous than it had ever been. Naturally, the 90s bred some very weird and creepy urban legends. Yes, many of these were just fake rumors, but many did in fact turn out to be true. And some are even still debated today. Today, we're going to talk about the strangest and eeriest urban legends of the 1990s, whatever became of them. Now, I've curated a list of stories that were both very popular at the time, and ones that were a bit underground, but became subjects of scrutiny later on just because of how creepy they were. I also thought it would be interesting to put a verdict at the end of each story, determining which ones were real or fake. So let's begin. Now, this first urban legend is a bit more humorous and lighthearted, but I think it provides a lot of insight into the mass spreading of information in a pre-internet world. I am talking about the strange urban legends surrounding Marilyn Manson. Now, the reason many of these rumors surrounding Marilyn Manson are so outlandish is because Marilyn Manson himself is a very outlandish person, especially when he first entered the spotlight in the 90s. His macabre and morbid persona was a culture shock, and many people started to wonder where such a strange act came from. Well, the Wonder Years, of course. Yes, years after it ended, a story started going around that Marilyn Manson played Paul on the period show The Wonder Years when he was a child. For those who don't know, The Wonder Years was a very popular primetime show in the late 80s and early 90s, with the series concluding in 1993, a couple of years before Marilyn Manson's first big hit. The exact origins of this myth are not exactly known, but it's no surprise that it became relatively widespread among young people just because of how absurd yet believable it was. The idea that the most sanitized character of the most sanitized show on TV at the time would grow up to become one of the most controversial and grotesque figures in pop culture is funny and has a realistic twist of irony to it. The pretty striking resemblance between the two gave a lot of credence to this rumor as well. So was it true? No, of course not. A quick Google search tells us that Marilyn Manson's real name is Brian Hugh Warner, and the actor who played Paul is named Josh Saviano, and Marilyn Manson is significantly older than him. But keep in mind, there was no Google during this part of the 90s, and the internet wasn't seen as that often reliable repository of information like it is today. People couldn't just easily look up what Marilyn Manson's real name was, or how old he was from a reputable source, or they just didn't really care to look it up. The same goes for finding information on the actor who played Paul, or how long ago The Wonder Years aired. This added a lot of ambiguity to these stories, and left people to their own imaginations, especially since a show like The Wonder Years was aimed at an older audience who grew up in the 60s, which is when the show takes place. Given that the show was already 7 years old when Marilyn Manson's hit was first released, a lot of younger people may have just assumed that these newer episodes were reruns from way back in the day. Some of them may have even assumed that the show actually was from the 60s and 70s. When you consider all these possible scenarios, the idea that Marilyn Manson was on the Wonder Years when he was a child doesn't become that unbelievable, and the age gap between him and Saviano becomes less relevant. So naturally, it just became one of those rumors that you chose to believe was true, until the internet got better and made fact-checking much easier. But this wasn't the only rumor about Marilyn Manson to appear at this time. Undeniably, the most popular and vulgar legend to spread was that Marilyn Manson cover your ears, children, had his ribs surgically removed so that he could, enjoy his own company. Practice more of his instruments. Yes, it was just another one of those stories that only enhanced Manson's shock persona. So it didn't seem that unbelievable just based on that. But is it true? No, it is not. Interestingly, in 2000, Dr. John E. Sherman of Weill Cornell Medical College mentioned that while having your ribs removed could technically be possible, there's never been any official publication of it in any peer-reviewed medical journals. There's also this official response from Marilyn Manson in his 1998 autobiography, The Long Hard Road Out of Hell, where he says that if it were true, he would have been too busy to be chasing Winnie Cooper on the Wonder Years. Childhood ruined. Something I found interesting while researching this whole story was that a lot of people referring to it as the most recent example of modern mythology. I think this tweet puts it best, that the 90s generation was able to use the lack of internet presence to their advantage to spread a rumor that was wild, but just realistic enough to have some suspension of disbelief that was purely anecdotal and couldn't be quickly fact-checked online. The story was true because they wanted it to be. This next one is probably the darkest on the list, but I had actually never heard of it, and when I first learned about it, I just fell down a total rabbit hole, and I had to include it. It pertains to a very peculiar VHS tape of unknown origin that was sent to Disneyland Resort in Anaheim, California in April of 1995. It arrived in the mail with no return address, and was received by a secretary. She put the tape in the VCR and was so disturbed by its contents that she took the tape out with a tissue in case there were fingerprints still on it and had sent it off to the FBI. Naturally, the intricate details of what was on this tape was kept on the down low. Other than that, the tape's message had unnerving implications against the welfare of the park. The end of the videotape mentioned the date April 14th, 1995, at 9 o'clock. Fortunately, nothing of note happened at the park when this time passed, but just 5 days later, tragedy would strike in Oklahoma City. A handful of people thought that these events were connected, but it appeared to just be a coincidence. In fact, President Clinton even indirectly talked about the incident during a press conference. Despite its insidious nature, thankfully, no one was hurt. The entire event was concluded to be a hoax, basically nothing more than just a cruel prank. The Disneyland park saw very heightened security on the day of April 14th, but guests, of course, weren't told why, and public information on the incident quickly started to die down. As the years went on, it essentially became one of those stories that had people asking, does anyone else remember this? Did it even really happen? Due to how low profile it was kept, no one was exactly sure of what happened beyond what these newspaper articles published. But then around 25 years later, a VHS tape shows up at a thrift store in Portland, Oregon, and the stars align, as it just so happens to be purchased by a media archivist who digitized tapes and uploads them to YouTube. The tape was labeled with the name Jerry Hill and an FBI case number. The archivist had no idea what the tape was when he uploaded it, but internet sleuths were quickly able to put it all together. Jerry Hill was the name of a former FBI employee. It was the tape from this story. It was all real. It has been uploaded to Dr. Rip VHS's YouTube channel, who was the one who found it. The video starts off with showing a newspaper article about an unpleasant chemical that someone released on the Space Mountain ride that made a bunch of guests get sick. At the bottom of this footage is text that says, "Good boy." The footage then pans to a bunch of old photos of unknown origin that appeared to date around the late 19th century. We then see an unidentified person wearing gloves handling what appears to be a bunch of vials and containers of strange liquids and refrigerated objects wrapped in foil. The camera then pans to a clock and calendar showing the aforementioned date of April 14th, 1995, at 9 o'clock. Lastly, we see footage of a busy street in front of what was, at the time, the Disneyland parking lot, with the text "Dead Guest" appearing at the bottom. The tape ends with footage from the Spanish comedy show Camara Infragante, suggesting that this may have been taped over an already existing program. The person responsible for creating the footage has never been caught, and their identity remains a mystery to this day. I learned about this entire thing from a video made by Mike DeForest, who was actually a Disneyland employee at the time of the incident. He even goes on to interview the Dr. Rib VHS YouTube channel. Barely Sociable has also done a video about the incident. They are both very insightful, and I highly suggest you check them out. But this, oddly enough, would not be the end of mysterious Disney VHS tapes from the 90s. At this time, people allegedly began spotting strange details in tapings of popular movies and TV shows, predominantly from Disney. This, of course, started the legend of subliminal messages, which would soon become a favorite millennial buzz phrase. The idea was that these megacorporations were hiding secret symbols and inappropriate content in movies and TV media with the intent of corrupting the minds of children. This included lewd imagery and even mentions of supposed secret societies hidden in Little Mermaid, Who Framed Roger Rabbit, Lion King, and many other things. Arguably one of the most popular examples of this comes from the movie The Rescuers, where a photograph of a naked woman allegedly appears in a window in the background. The origin of this image is actually still unknown to this day, and it only appears for a couple of frames. In fact, most of these only appear for very brief moments. That is because a lot of this media was produced during a time where only live broadcasting and theater showings of entertainment were publicly available. You couldn't just go in and rewind something. This luxury didn't come along until the 70s and the 80s, with the rise of Betamax and VHS, with the latter exploding in popularity in the 90s. That is when these people finally started catching on to all of these strange hidden details. But is any of it true? Well, I'm gonna put both yes and no for this one. Yes, these things can in fact be found in these movies and shows. It hasn't been doctored by online users, but I don't think there's anything nefarious behind it. I think it's just a bunch of animators and editors goofing around by sneaking in adult humor. The animator that hid the naked woman in The Rescuers allegedly did so because she was passed on a promotion by Disney and was eventually even let go. Other examples include the infamous ghost that appears in the background of Three Men and a Baby. This was actually just a cardboard cutout of Ted Danson that was accidentally left on the set, which just so happens to be much scarier than a ghost. I'm just kidding. I love Ted Danson. But these weren't always just Disney, and these weren't always real either. Another very popular example involves a dead munchkin that is supposedly visible in the background during a scene in The Wizard of Oz. The earliest records of this story date as far back as 1993, and there are two versions of this footage. The first one shows something that resembles a large bird flapping its wings, and the second one shows a version that much more closely resembles the shape of a person, which I can't show because YouTube understandably took down the original upload of this that I made, but you can always Google it yourself to see what I am referring to. But this story takes a bit of a weird turn. If you've followed this urban legend for some time, you may have been told that the bird flapping its wings was digitally added in to hide this human-shaped figure. But actually, the bird version came first, and weirdly enough, this was actually the version of the clip that sparked the urban legend back in the early 90s.
As they disappear around the corner, if you're not looking at them, if you look at the screen behind them, you can see the shadow.
For whatever reason, people thought that this bird flapping its wings resembled a dying person. But this same bird can actually be seen in other parts of the same scene in the background. If you're like me and have no idea how people came to this conclusion in the first place, you're not alone. In fact, that is most likely why another hoax version of the scene appeared in around 2011, with this narrative attached to it, likely to make the whole story more believable. The reason I know this is because I was there. By a crazy coincidence, I just so happened to be obsessively studying this story the very same day this hoax video came out back in 2011. It was around March at the time. And I remember being surprised that a new version of the clip appeared. Other channels at the time that are now lost very quickly started debunking it, even mentioning that part of the bird's wing is still visible from this doctoring. Before this version came out, I remember being so confused why people thought this bird resembled a person. In short, it was a legend that started from people seeing things, and then when another hoax version of it appeared, it further reinforced it. Either way, it is just another byproduct of these many strange stories that originated from movie and television tapings of the time. There have been a few instances throughout television history, particularly children's television, where a program aired that was deemed so disturbing by audiences that it was quickly removed from broadcasting and even completely locked away in studio archives, never to be seen again. In the late 90s, it was rumored that Nickelodeon began working on a horror movie called Crybaby Lane. It was scheduled to be aired on the SNCC programming block during the Halloween season in 2000. The movie centered around two brothers and their group of friends who live in a small town. This town is the home of a legend surrounding two conjoined twins, one good and one evil. When the twins died, the town's undertaker cut them in half with a saw and buried them separately. During a seance that the kids partake in as a joke, the ghosts of these twins begin to terrorize the town, even possessing one of the brothers. Nick. Yeah, to no surprise, it was reported that kids who saw this broadcast were absolutely traumatized by it, and so parents made angry complaints to Nickelodeon Studios about it. It got so out of control, Nickelodeon was rumored to have completely locked the film away, didn't have any copies made for distribution, and chose to never air it again. They essentially buried this movie and acted like it never existed. People had anecdotal stories and eyewitness accounts of those who watched the broadcast the night it aired, but that was all they could really rely on. Its ambiguous whereabouts further added to the mystery, even inspiring some creepypasta stories. And so, Crybaby Lane soon remained a legend and lost film over the next decade. But then in 2011, the full movie was uploaded to YouTube. Someone who watched the broadcast that night just so happened to tape it, confirming that this legend was in fact true. Now, I watched Crybaby Lane and it's really not that scary. Even compared to something like Courage the Cowardly Dog and other children's horror, it's pretty freaking tame. I mean, Jim Gaffigan is in it, for crying out loud. But given that the film's plot revolves around things like dismemberment and possession, especially during a time where the satanic panic was still pretty fresh, it makes sense why a lot of parents would be outraged. That same year it resurfaced, Teen Nick decided to air it a second time during their 90s Rewind programming block. And so, the internet was able to resurrect Crybaby Lane through a seance of its own. For this last one, I surprisingly could not find a whole lot of information, to the point where I was doubting that it was even a real concern at the time. But as I kept digging, it got a bit weirder. I am talking about the concept of a VHS tape virus. During the height of commercial tape distribution, rumors started going around that certain companies were infecting their tapes with essentially rogue software. What seemed like an innocent videotape was actually programmed to destroy both your VCR and itself if anyone attempted to copy from it. This was done to help combat piracy. Many of these tapes would even come with stickers disclosing this. I actually almost didn't include this in my video because of the little information I found and just how ridiculous of a concept it is. The only thing I initially could find directed me to an Etsy page, so I assumed that this was just some meme that a nostalgia page created a couple of years ago. But then I started searching for just random videotapes online, and then I found eBay listings in the wild of VHS tapes that had these stickers on them. I think this lends a lot of credence to the idea that this was indeed a thing back in the 90s. I even found a forum post from 2005 talking about it. But is it real? Were there commercial VHS tapes going around with viruses on them? I'm gonna say no. The stickers on these tapes reference a company called Scattervision, which I assume is a competitor of the popular Macrovision, a company which specialized in VHS copyright protection. However, when searching through newspapers.com, I could not find any record that a company called Scattervision ever existed. And even if it did, macrovision was already a much more efficient and safer way of fighting piracy. Macrovision worked by essentially altering the video signal in a way where your TV screen could still play it normally, but the VCR would get insanely confused when you tried to record it. Therefore, if you tried copying a macrovision protected tape, you would get something that's unwatchable. This is a much better method than creating something that just destroys expensive equipment when you try to make copies with it. There is no commercial incentive for that. It isn't exactly technologically practical either. Yes, you can install computer software on tape. In fact, a lot of personal computers from the 70s and 80s used software from cassettes that stored the program data as modulated audio signals. But these personal computers are also programmed to look for these signals and turn them into tangible data. VCRs don't do that. So even if you did successfully install a virus on a VHS tape, it's still not gonna do anything. Just for this reason. This was most likely just a scare tactic companies used on naive people back in the 90s. Though I am tempted to buy one of these tapes and test it out for myself. Let me know if you'd like to see that. If you'd like to learn more outlandish computer viruses or other strange 90s media, you can find those videos right here. A special thanks to my Patreon supporters. Check out patreon.com/nationsquid, or you can even buy me a coffee. Thank you for watching, everyone.